thank you very much to Rick and Jim and Jackie, and also to Jennifer Fording. Jennifer Fording called me about a month ago and asked me to do this presentation, and I jumped at the chance for a number of reasons. One is I myself come from a very rural area in Pennsylvania, up in the northern part of Pennsylvania on the Susquehanna River, which was I grew up on a dairy farm, and it was a very rural area, and Elmore always reminded me of that area, so I jumped at the chance to come over here, and this meeting reminds me so much of my childhood, so I'm very happy to be here. One of the things that I noticed when I came in was this tapestry on the wall here. That is really a fascinating tapestry. I don't know if maybe you are aware of it, probably being from this town you are, but the Elmore car was the official taxi cab of Washington, D.C. in 1910. And so if you didn't know that, that's one of the things that will be in our book. Well, speaking of the book, let me explain what we're doing. I asked Jennifer Fording, do you want me to talk about the history of Ottawa County as it relates to Elmore, or the book that we are putting together? And she said, definitely talk about the book. So that's what I'm going to do. About a year, maybe 13 months ago, I'm on the board of the Ottawa County Historical Society. And about 13 months ago, we were at a meeting, and the discussion came up. Ottawa County is now 175 years old as of 2015. It was founded on March 6th, 1840. And Judge Moon, the president of the Historical Society, said we should really write a book about the Ottawa County history in honor of our 175th anniversary. And he said, would anybody, and we all said, yeah, that's a great idea. And then he said, would anybody like to volunteer to be the point man on that project? And stupid as I'm just a farm boy, and I put up my hand, and and I've been sort of reeling ever since. Why am I qualified to do this? I am not from Ottawa County. I am from Pennsylvania, Indiana, California, Michigan, and then Ohio. And I arrived here with my wife and kids 20 years ago. I was hired to run a little plant in Sandusky, and when we arrived here in 1995, my wife and I, Karen, we went around and said, where do we want to live? And so we went around about a 50-mile circle around Sandusky, and we settled on Ottawa County. What a fascinating place. This is such a fascinating place. And I think I am qualified to write about this because I'm not from here. And in interviewing people from all over Ottawa County, I'm realizing that that is a good qualification to not be from here, because there are so many little nooks and crannies in Ottawa County, and each one is filled with people, sometimes not quite filled, but has people in it who are so passionate about their own little tiny little burg or county or what used to be a town that it isn't even there anymore. And so I realized you need somebody from outside. Even though I've been here 20 years, some of you people have been here 150 years, your families. And so I'm not you personally. But as an example, I happened to meet Mark Mulligan today here at this table, and he was telling me about his family being from Oak Harbor from, 4 generations now, I think, and his ancestors were electricians, and it was a fascinating subject. And I think what we are finding, we who are putting this book together, what we did is we got a number of volunteers to go out and look for information for this book. And those volunteers, we specifically wanted to make sure we got them from various parts of the county, so that because Judge Moon even said this to me one day. He said, our historical society has become too focused on the eastern part of the county. We need to open up and bring the whole county in. And so we deliberately went to every corner of the county and with our volunteers to do interviews and to look for pictures and anecdotes and so forth. And we have found that in the western part of the county here, so many people have been here for just 4, 5, 6 generations, and it's a fascinating story. So what I want to do is, there's a couple of things that I'm not going to do. I'm not going to have a slideshow. I brought a few pictures just to give you an idea of what kinds of things we'll put in the book, but I'm not going to do a slideshow because that's too easy. It's anybody can do a slideshow. You want to hear about the book, and that's what I would like you to hear about. So the slides that we have up there are just a little extra. I'm also, in telling you about the book, I'm not going to focus on Elmore because you obviously already know all about Elmore. But I want to tell you about Ottawa County very briefly because it is such a huge subject. I can only just touch the surface of it. And thirdly, I am not going to talk very much about contemporary history, meaning, middle 20th century to now. I'm going to talk, what little bit I am going to tell you about in our limited time is going to be before that. So especially back in the 1800s. So also I want to, before I forget, I want to mention that we are the Ottawa County Historical Society on April 17th at the Ottawa Wildlife Refuge up there on Route 2 is going to have, it's from 1 to 3 on April 17th, is going to have a meeting, and which we are going to do a more detailed presentation than I am going to do about the history of Ottawa County and our book, how our book relates to it. And Jennifer Fording has information about that at the library. So, so what I want to do now is I want to tell you about the group that is putting the book together. As I said, we have about 10 volunteers who went out and did all kinds of research, brought back thousands of words of narrative from various places, Clay Center and all these different places, and some towns that have completely disappeared, but people were from there and told us stories about it, and lots and lots of pictures. This book is going to be a hardcover, glossy pages, about 280 pages. It will have about 400 black and white photographs in it from all over Ottawa County. There will also be some color, but most historical pictures are black and white. And it will have about somewhere between 40 and 50,000 words of narrative. The narrative will be told as a story going around the pictures. And so the book will be published. We are anticipating it will be published sometime between October 1st and November 1st in this fall. And anybody who would, the price of the book when it's published will be about $50. We haven't exactly settled on that. But for people who want to pre-order it, they can pre-order it for $40. And there is a form on the table back there for that purpose if you would like to take one of those forms with you, and you can mail it to us and we will save a book for you. Among the crew of people that are working on this book, as I mentioned, we had the volunteers, and we also have, I have 3 associate editors who are helping me with this, and all 3 of them are here tonight. Nancy Dunham. Nancy Dunham is a retired school teacher. She taught at Port Clinton for years and is an excellent writer. And so her talents are very important to us. Rich Norgard is he is a former private investigator and did all kinds of adventurous things in his life, and is also a writer and very, very talented. Linda Huber she has just recently moved to Ottawa County and has fallen in love with the place and is very much involved in historical societies around the township and around the county and also across northern Ohio, and it was very important for her to join us because she is one of those real practical people who calls me up and says, "You said you were going to have this done last week." And you know, when you're working with writers, you need somebody to keep prodding you, and Linda has done a great job at that. So to talk, I'm going to now tell you basically what our book is about. The main characteristic, if there is one characteristic about Ottawa County, it really came out just as we were talking at this table. Mark Mulligan started talking about, well, I think the first Catholic church was here in Elmore. Well, he's from Elmore. And then Linda says, well, wait a minute, I think the first Catholic church was over in Marblehead. Well, she's from that area, she's from Lakeside. And I'm thinking, in my research, I thought the first Catholic church was in Frenchtown. So, there's Ottawa County right there. And so, the main characteristic of Ottawa County is that it is so diverse. It is the most diverse county in Ohio. If you look at it on the map, it is 50 miles long. There is no other county that long. And it has more coastline than any other county. It has islands, it has farms, it has everything you can imagine that is in the rest of the county. It is here. It has all different kinds of populations. It has quarries, people who came to work in the quarries, people who came to cut down lumber, people who came to farm, people who came to trade with the Ottawa Indians. I mean, it is just so diverse, and that diversity is the main characteristic that we have. It keeps hitting us in the face every time we start taking narratives from people. So where we are on this book is we are in the process of now writing the narrative. I'm doing the initial writing of it. I'm at about 40,000 words now, and we will probably have about 50,000 words. And we expect that to be done shortly. And then what we're going to do is take all of the pictures that we have and meld them into the narrative to make a layout for the book, and then we're going to go back and re-look at the whole thing and say, okay, our biggest fear, have we left something out here? Is somebody going to get mad because we didn't mention that? We can't possibly please everybody, but we're going to do the best we can. Here, I'm going to read you a very quick example of, because you're from Elmore, I will read a very quick example of of the style of the book. It'll just take me a minute to read this, but you'll get an idea of the style that I'm using for this book. And throughout the book, we're not just describing dry historical stuff. We're putting it in the forms of stories, using as many real people that we know about as we can. And also, every once in a while, we give an overview to the narrative in the present tense. Here is an example which involves Elmore. And I'll just read this very quickly. This is written in the present tense as if somebody is visiting eastern Ottawa County back in the, like about 1820 or so, or 1830. Some of the folks arriving here are thinking of settling further inland, although the swampy western area appears indomitable. Movement overland in the Great Black Swamp is arduous, if not often impossible, and certainly dangerous. Nonetheless, we hear stories of a few hardy souls venturing to probe the interior. Some say the Toussaint and Portage rivers offer a way in, and that sparse and tentative settlements are slowly coming into existence along their banks. So who are these daring people? On the southwest corner of what is now Ottawa County, the Portage River is just shallow enough for a natural crossing through the rapids. A man named Joseph Harris has built a cabin here in 1817. Having discovered a place where river and foot traffic meet, he starts a lucrative trading enterprise with the Ottawa. Soon there are 6 families in the area. A settlement comes to life around Harris's first trading post that would turn into the village of Elmore and its vicinity, which was then part of Sandusky County. Harris Township, named for its first permanent citizen, is formed in 1825. Thanks to glacial deposits underlying hard clay strata, those who put land to the plow find the soil to be rich. It is said that the soil in western Ottawa County is among the richest anywhere. Agriculture quickly prospers in the new township, with farmers cultivating corn, oats, barley, rye, and fruit. Nothing about the life these first settlers lead could be easy. Disease is common, sometimes killing entire families, especially in warm weather. Much of the low-lying land away from the river is a bog. Close to the river, clear cutting on an arable flat area involves removing trees several feet in diameter by hand. The nearest grist mill is in Fremont, not accessible overland at all. Farmers have to transport their grain down the river to Port Clinton, then either carry it overland on Fulton Street or transport it all the way around Catawba and the peninsula into the Sandusky Bay, and finally southward up the Sandusky River. And that is only half of it. The finished flour or meal has to be brought home over the same route in reverse. Filing deeds, conducting legal business, what about voting? All are activities that require township residents to make the long journey to Fremont. So that is an example of how this book is written, and I naturally, to get you on my side, I talked to you about Elmore. What that does is that tells us why Ottawa County was founded separately from Sandusky County, because it also tells you how people had to live back then. And I still wonder, why did they come here? You know, what were they thinking? And I guess what that tells us is a lot about the spirit of the people who founded Ottawa County, and that spirit is still here. Many people are descendants of those people who came here facing terrible situations and the harshness of it, and yet they succeeded. And so anyway, that gives you an example of what we're doing with the book and where we're going with it. Now, in the beginning, when Ottawa County was first founded, to again reiterate how much and reemphasize how diverse this county was. When the county was first founded, within the first 10 years, it changed shape 3 or 4 times. The original shape of Ottawa County, the southern border of Ottawa County went straight across, the western border went all the way north, all the way to the lake, and on the eastern end of Ottawa County, it included Kelly's Island. And that's an interesting story, because what was going on there was a big fight, as you probably have heard, between Port Clinton and Oak Harbor over who would be the county seat. And the people in Oak Harbor, at that time it was called, it had a different name. Hartford, correct, thank you. At that time, the people of Hartford were claiming, well, we are in the geographic center of the county pretty much, and the people who live out in this swamp, why would they have to go all the way to Port Clinton to carry on legal business? And so the people in Port Clinton, the original founders of Port Clinton were land speculators, what they decided was, we need to move the geographic center of Ottawa County to the east, make it closer to Port Clinton, so they had the state include Kelly's Island in the county, so that moved everything to the east. Well, 5 years later, the people who lived on Kelly's Island said, why do we have to go all the way to Port Clinton to do something when Sandusky's right over here? So 5 years later, it got moved back into Erie County. So that just gives you an example of the struggle that was going on among the people of this county. And then they fought for 60 years between Port Clinton and Oak Harbor. There was a fight most of it took place in the Ohio Assembly over where the county seat should be. And Oak Harbor continuously kept trying to get it moved west, and the people in Port Clinton kept trying to keep it where it was. The whole thing finally settled down not until 1899, I think it was, right around that time, when the original courthouse started to fall apart. And so the people in Oak Harbor said, now we know how we can get this county seat moved. We will offer to build a courthouse and we'll pay for it ourselves if they'll move the county seat over here. So they made that offer, and there was another big fight in the Ohio House, and so they appointed a bunch of commissioners to come up here. You know, as politicians always do, they appoint commissioners when they don't want to make a decision. They appointed a bunch of commissioners, and 40 commissioners came up here and visited both towns, and I don't know where they got the cheaper booze, but apparently it was in Port Clinton because they decided to keep it in Port Clinton and help pay for the cost of the new courthouse over there. So, but in return for that, the county home and that area over near just east of Oak Harbor, where there is now county central buildings, that was sort of given to the Oak Harbor area as, you know, like a sort of, well, you guys didn't get to be the county seat, so we'll put these buildings over there, and then it hired a lot of people and so forth. So, so the squabble finally was over, at least officially. But it's in our interviews, we have found it is not over. And I know I was interviewing a guy and telling him what we were trying to do, and he said, "This isn't going to be all about Port Clinton, is it?" You know. And I said, "No, I'm not from Port Clinton. I just moved here." He goes, "Oh, well, that's good." You know. So you can see the culture of Ottawa County is just so fascinating. And what happened in the 1800s, once the county was founded, then the Great Black Swamp had to be drained. And it took about 60 years to drain the Great Black Swamp. And the Great Black Swamp, I'll show you that on a slide when we get to that, is a huge place. The Great Black Swamp goes from, say, Port Clinton all the way to Fort Wayne, and it's in places it's about 60 miles wide, and then it sort of narrows down as you get to Fort Wayne. And what they did, they had to actually dig trenches. Well, you people that are from the farms, you know exactly what that involved. They had to dig ditches along each of the road. The roads were, of course, laid out according to surveyor lines, square mile surveyor lines, and quarter section lines. And they dug ditches along these roads and used the dirt to build the roads up. And slowly the farms were drained with tile into these ditches, and these ditches all eventually led to the Portage River and the Toussaint River and the various tributaries, which turned the Great Black Swamp into some of the richest farmland in the world. But that took about 40 to 60 years to do. But once it was done, it completely transformed Ottawa County. Ottawa County became a breadbasket type of place. And again, we look at the diversity. In the eastern part of the county, up there where the islands are, where Marblehead is, and Danbury Township and all that, Catawba, that was all wineries and fruit and in fact, Catawba at one time was called the peach capital of Ohio, or maybe of the world. I can't remember which now. But they produced so many peaches in Catawba Township that sometimes they produced so many that they just became valueless, and they had to just let them rot because they just had too many. And of course, until Prohibition, then they started making brandy out of on the sly. But then over in this area and north of here, oh, I forgot to mention, I was telling you about the way Ottawa County changed shape. Up there, as I said, the western border of Ottawa County went all the way to Lake Erie and included what is now Jerusalem Township and all that up in there. Well, then in 1850, Lucas County was cut in half, and part of it was made Trumbull County, I think it's called. And so Lucas County was too small. So they took back the part up there where now Oregon and those towns are up there. So that changed the shape of Ottawa County. And then down in this corner here, in the southwestern corner, Woodville wanted to be in Sandusky County, and they wanted to, or they were already in Sandusky County, but they wanted to be in the center of Woodville Township. So they carved a little piece of Ottawa County out and gave it back to Sandusky County so that Woodville would be centrally located in Woodville Township. So, well, you know how it is when politicians get together, they start dividing things up. Let's see, was there another change that was made? I think I've covered them all. Yes. So I got sidetracked there for a second. So then, what happened in the 1800s, once the swamp was being drained and Ottawa County became a huge agricultural area with, as I said, one type of agriculture over on the eastern part of the county and another type of agriculture here, where these farms. It's interesting to follow the development of agriculture in this area, because what happened is the farms started out as survival farms. People were just trying to get by and hope they weren't bitten by snakes and mosquitoes and spiders and attacked by wolves and bears. I know that the guy who founded Clay County, Clay Township, I can't think of his name at the moment, but he made a living just on bounties of wolves. He would just kill wolves, and I think they used to take their ears in, and he would get paid for that, and that's how he made his living. So you can imagine how wild this area was. Even the local native people, would warn white settlers, don't even go in there. I mean, they did have trails such as Route 105 out here. Is it 105? Do I have the right number? 105 on the north side of the river, and then what is your main street here that goes over to all the way to Route 53. Those two roads were the original trails that the local natives used to move back and forth through the Black Swamp without actually having to go in the Black Swamp. And the reason those trails were there and were able to be used was because, being close to the river, the land was pretty well drained, as opposed to the rest of western Ottawa County, which water just sat. And although there were some areas where there were some ridges, and some native trails followed those ridges. But other than that, the natives people, the Ottawa, Chippewa, Potawatomi, Shawnee, Erie, they've all lived here at various times, and sometimes together, sometimes separately. They all did not even want to go into the swamp. So once the swamp began to be drained and turned into farms, it completely transformed Ottawa County. So, and then the railroads started coming. Oh, before I get to the railroads, the swamps were full of tremendous trees. I mean, some of these trees were 6 feet in diameter, and swamp oaks especially, and what they did with those, it brought about a huge lumber industry, and which people from Oak Harbor are aware of. Oak Harbor was built from lumber being shipped down the river and then to the east for building, just building lumber, and also some of it was used for things like furniture and that sort of thing. Let me see, where was I here now?
Railroad.
Railroad, thank you. See, it's a good thing we got Linda on our... She does her job, I'll tell you. The railroads came through here in the late 1840s to 1850. It changed, the various railroads changed their names quite a bit. So I won't try to go through the names of the various railroads that came through here, but the main line went from Sandusky, came across the bay, went through Port Clinton, and then across the northern part of the county. But there was also another line that came through here that went to Fremont, and that was part of that same railroad. And as a result of the railroad, then towns started to build up along those railroads where the farmers could take their goods. Originally, the farmers could take their goods, and then the quarries started using them. Because of the accessibility of the rails, the quarries were able to really take off, and for a while, our county was full of operating quarries. Now we have a few left, and some of them are still doing very well. But most of the quarries are gone now, or just not being used. One exceptional quarry is that I think it's still true. Is the one up at Clay Center, which I can't think of the name of the rock that comes out of there, but it's pardon me?
White rock.
Well, no, there's a geological name for that particular stone, and I can't think of it, but it is very valuable, and so I think that's still coming out of there. It's one of the main sources in the world for that particular type of dolomite or whatever that's called. But then what happened is the railroads in the 20th century, as the roads were finally being improved, and I have a picture of them improving the roads, as the roads were being improved, the railroads became less and less important, especially for travel for passenger travel. They were still used for freight, but not so much for passenger, and because people started driving, and also truck transports could then carry goods instead of railroads, and the railroads slowly stopped. They stopped having their stops along the railroads. Instead of stopping every 20 miles, they were stopping every 50 miles, and so a lot of little towns up along the railroad just disappeared completely. And there are some that are still there that just are barely considered towns, but there are some that have completely disappeared. Let's see if one of the things I wanted to talk about is the original people who were here. There's not very much information about the American natives who were here, but the reason there isn't very much information is because there was some. I'll just tell you about one side of this whole story. There's a whole lot more to it, but I'll tell you one side. There was something that occurred in the 1760, I believe, right around there, 1760. It was before the American Revolution. There was something called the Beaver War, and what the Beaver War was is the British and the French had come over here and had started trading in pelts. They sided with various American native tribes to actually go and get these pelts. muskrats, beavers, all kinds of stuff. And this was being driven by the fashion industry in Europe. The beaver pelts, muskrat pelts, and all the other different types of pelts that were so valuable, they were, to that time, what oil is today. They were so important in the world economy. And Britain and France were constantly fighting each other over the rights to beaver pelts and muskrat pelts. And what they did is they solicited the participation of various Indian or Native American tribes in this area to collect those pelts. And so when the British and French would fight each other, they didn't actually fight each other, they had the Indian tribes fight each other. As a result, the Erie Indians, who were very plentiful around this area, were almost completely wiped out. And the reason was because the British had, the British had sided with the Seneca. The Seneca are over in western Pennsylvania and western New York now. The British sided with them, the French sided with the Erie, and the British also secured the newest arms. The big arms dealer of those days was Holland. The Dutch were the big arms dealers, and the British had purchased arms from the Dutch and given them to the Seneca, and the Seneca were able to wipe out the Erie almost completely. And for a while, there were no Indian Native American tribes even in this area because they were just completely wiped out, and they were also afraid of being attacked by the Seneca. And eventually the Ottawa came down from Canada and moved into this area. And of course, none of this there were no monolithic Indian tribes. A lot of them were mixed together, intermarried, and so forth. So there were Chippewa and Shawnee. Tecumseh was a Shawnee. Chippewa, Shawnee, and Potawatomi, Miami were also around here. But, well, I could go on and on and on. And as I said, I wanted to talk about Ottawa County's history earlier than now and not focus on things that have happened in the last 50 to 100 years because, I figure most of you already know quite a bit about that. But this is how I'm going to finish up tonight because I could go on forever and keep you here all night. So I'm going to read a little section as a wrap-up. This would have been in 1840 when the county was founded. If somebody could have just passed over like in an ultralight or something from the northeastern part of the county and come west and then up toward Toledo, what would they have seen? So I wrote that from that point of view, and that's how I will wrap this up. So if you can bear with me and make sure my pages aren't all mixed up here. Okay, here we go. This is called What We Look Like. What we looked like in 1840 when the county was founded. We can glimpse how we may have appeared to others at our founding from historian Henry Howe. Henry Howe was a famous historian who wrote many history books, including books of about Ohio. Henry Howe, who toured the state for several years and then published the first history of Ohio in 1846. In composing his tome, he visited almost every county. Ottawa was one of the three he passed up, exclaiming, "There was little or no history, and mostly all wilderness, and few inhabitants other than wild animals." That's how he saw Ottawa County, even though he'd never been here. Suppose we go back to that time, take a look around, just to compare that evaluation, one that Howe had pronounced in the absence of even a cursory visit. It is 1840. From the observation window of imagination, we can begin by coming in from the north over the islands. Covered with trees, some appear uninhabited, but others show the unmistakable signs of agriculture in the form of clearings. Small fields have been plowed, cattle and other livestock are out to pasture, and smoke rises from the cabins dotting the landscape. A few of those clearings are laid out in the unmistakable patterns of fruit tree and vine cultivation. Boats are tied to small docks, and many more are out on the water where commercial fishing has recently begun to flourish. Henry Ellithorpe having discovered that this area supports large quantities of whitefish. Excuse me. Other boats transport people and goods among the islands and between here and the mainland. Moving south to Catawba, just off the shore, we see more fishermen plying their trade. A settlement appears at the northern end, known as Ottawa City. That was up at the north end of Catawba Island, a town that's no longer there. Fanning out from it are more small acreage farms that have been cut into the woods, many fields with rows of cultivation, well-tended orchards of peaches, pears, and plums, and pastures with grazing livestock. A log building serves as the first schoolhouse. A road is under construction, running north and south along the eastern side of the island. That's Route 53 North. Moving south, we pass over elongated lagoons, vestiges of what were the eastern runs of the Portage River in ancient times, which now just barely separate the island from the main peninsula. To the east, the lighthouse stands out. Beside it, Marblehead has grown up, settled by fishermen and quarry workers. Peering into the Clemens Quarry, we can see men against a backdrop of white and gray stone, digging with picks and crowbars. Off to the east in Lake Erie on Kelly's Island, a larger crew works a similar quarry, also owned by the Clemens family. Across the bay to the south, the town of Sandusky shows off pristine limestone buildings lining the main streets. Closer to our own shore is a 300-acre Bulls Island, part of the original holdings acquired by land speculator Epaphroditus Bull that will later become Johnson's Island. To the west, a muddy north-south trail runs between the bay and the lake, the former Delary Portage, now with buildings on either side of it that continue along the lakeshore into the grid of an established town, Port Clinton, its new stone lighthouse overlooking the mouth of the Portage. A boat transports goods from sawmills upstream, while the stream also spews floating logs out into the lake. Workers hoist products on board a ship at anchor. Offshore, we see fishing boats out for the day's catch. As we continue west into the heart of the new county, the land mass widens out. A long lakeshore runs to the northwest and another to the southwest around the end of the bay, both flourishing with high grasses and speckled with waterfowl. In all directions, scattered clearings surround log cabins and bark huts, especially near waterways where fishing, trapping, and hunting are combined with subsistence farming under curls of hearth smoke that rise from the mud and brick chimneys. Crude fences protect livestock from packs of wolves that are known to roam the forest. From our imaginary vantage point, we look down through thick foliage cover, spotting occasional reflections of the sky off dark standing pools of water. Upstream from the lake, the Sault River supports individual homes and a few clustered settlements, a loose arrangement of human habitation that folks are starting to call Frenchtown. As we move up the Portage, we find homesteads where Quaker farmers from Maryland have turned some of the arable clearings into grain and hog production. And now we discover the source of all that lumber and milled goods floating down the river. Oak Harbor, at this time called Hartford. It is the result of Adolphus Kramer's efforts to build an industry out of the surrounding abundance of hardwood, which will fire up the area's economic engine for many years to come. Beyond Oak Harbor, more boats can be seen coming and going on the river from the community of Elmore, a crossroads of river and road traffic for the southwestern corner of the county. What started out as a trading post has burgeoned into a community with streets, a mill, stores, a place of worship, and that single sign of a community's determination to put its shoulder to the wheel of the future, a school. To the northwest of Elmore, the Sherman Farm, begun 5 years ago, has begun to thrive thanks to drainage of soil by way of Packer Creek, the beginnings of a settlement that will become Genoa. Much of the rest of our region, though sparsely peopled due primarily to the various dangers posed by the Black Swamp, does support habitation, and we must be careful to not be thinking only of white settlers. Although many Ottawa have moved either back across the lake into Ontario or onto a reservation near Fremont, some remain in the northwest corner of the county, folks who ply their skills at living off the land in the ridged areas and trading with their neighbors. So that gives you, here this Henry Howe said, I didn't even look at Ottawa County because it's nothing but a bunch of wild people, wild animals and no people. And here, this is what it really looked like in 1840. So with that, I'm going to start some slides here. There's only about 6 or 7 slides just to give you an example of what is in the book, what kinds of pictures are in the book. So is this thing ready to go here? Oh, you just turned, oh. Okay, don't.
Just give it.
The first slide will be a picture of, excuse me, an illustration of the Great Black Swamp and just how massive the swamp was. I guess I talked too long and that thing decided to snooze. There we go. So if I just hit that button, then it will.
So pause it.
So if I hit the pause button, it will go again.
Unpause it, it'll take a second, and then
okay.
The next one, pause it.
Okay, thank you. So, if you can see this, this is the Great Black Swamp, and Fort Wayne is right there. You can see how massive that swamp was. Now it is all very rich farmland. And so we were just at the very beginning of it. You know, here's Ottawa County, there's Elmore right about in here. And so all that water slowly crept toward the lake and sat in Ottawa County as it slowly seeped into Lake Erie. So you can imagine the massive job it was. And it originally, you know, I asked Mark Mulligan if maybe his being an Irish name, I thought maybe his ancestors came from the people who dug the Erie Canal in New York, because a lot of those Irish people came to Ottawa County because it was thought that the Ohio Canal, one of the possibilities was to start the Ohio Canal over by Port Clinton and dig it all the way down through two various rivers to link up to the Ohio. And they ended up being in Cleveland and Toledo, the two branches of the Ohio Canal. But a lot of Irish people who had dug the Erie Canal moved to Ohio thinking we're going to dig another canal. So, but that never did happen. And that's why Port Clinton was called Port Clinton, because the land speculators who ran Port Clinton at that time were trying to entice DeWitt Clinton, who was the governor of New York, who had engineered the Erie Canal. They were trying to entice him to come here and build a canal. That's why they named it Port Clinton. Didn't work. Some other politicians got to him first, I guess. So anyway, this is I wanted you to have an idea of what the Black Swamp looks like, and it was a massive swamp. So originally, yes?
It's not in Ottawa County, but the first cross swamp road was Route 20 between Fremont and Perrysburg. And there are still stone mile markers.
Markers?
22.
Yeah.
Measure the distance.
Fascinating. Yep. Thank you. Anybody else want to jump in? Go right ahead. The next slide is, as I was going to say, they dug those trenches and the trenches along the roads and leading to the rivers by hand. And so then somebody came up with, so I hit this, a machine to do it. And one of our researchers got in touch with a guy who had done a master's thesis, I believe it was, on the draining of the Black Swamp, and he provided us with this picture. And this was some kind of a steam-operated device, trenching, basically a trenching machine. If you know anything about trenching, you can see that device right there, digs trenches. But this was only toward the end of the whole operation that they started doing it this way. It was mostly dug by hand. So you can imagine, when you look at some of these ditches that we have in this county, some of them are like 12 feet, 15 feet deep, and imagine people digging that with a pick and shovel. So here is, we'll go one more. As I said, the lumber that we got out of this area, that the original lumber people got out of this area, some of these trees were 6 feet in diameter. That might even be more than that. I'm not sure. I believe this came from one of our photos from Oak Harbor, I believe. But you can see what the people who originally settled here, I mean, they were hard-working people. You imagine cutting a tree like that by hand? I've done it with a chainsaw, just a small tree, and it's work. Can you imagine doing that? So let's go to the next one. Now this is, unfortunately I forgot to bring the caption with this, but maybe some of you know what this is. It says the Elmore on it, so I assumed that this was in Elmore.
The hotel.
Okay. Okay. So what we're going to do, what I'm doing here is just showing you an example. We have about 400 pictures in this book, and these are examples of the pictures we're going to have, and then the narrative will go around those pictures. And our last, I think I have 3 pictures. Oh no, this one here. Developments in Ottawa County was the building of the roads. Before they had roads, everybody had to travel through mud, sometimes waist-deep mud, or the main arteries of transportation were the waterways, and which is one of the reasons Elmore built up where it did, is because of the river, and there was also a trail that crossed right here, which I assume is where the bridge is now. And so it was a crossroads, and crossroads were very important during those times because that's where trade occurred. So, but anyway, this is one of the many pictures that we have of how the roads were built. Once the quarries got going, there was all kinds of stone to be used to pack down the roads and make them passable. And of course, this was after the invention of the automobile and the trucks and so forth. But eventually, eventually the transportation was so good on the roads that's why the railroads started losing their importance. And I think this is, I didn't have a caption for this either, but this is so typical of the way people did things back, 50 to 100 years ago and beyond. Is, these are people probably all working together to get in some kind of a harvest or something, and they're all eating lunch. And that was very typical of the rural culture that grew up to be what we are now. You can see people were worked together back in those days very well. And I don't know what happened here. We talked about the quarries, how important the quarries became. That's one of our themes in our book, is how important those quarries were. There were quarries all over Ottawa County. Look at this. This is all being done with horses and picks and shovels. And of course they used dynamite too. But you can see what a primitive operation this was. But it brought in all kinds of people. It provided all kinds of jobs. This was big industry. And especially as the lumber industry, as the lumber was all cut and the land turned into farms, the quarry industry did very much to take its place. And I think I have one more quarry picture here. Yeah, this is a more modern picture. I think this is from over near Marblehead, but now this is what whoops, I forgot to tell that thing to stop. This is what it was in the early part of the 20th century that's basically what they call a steam shovel. That's what that is. And then the previous one showed you a modern quarry. So I hope I have given you a representative example of what you can expect from this book. And I would like to, if anybody has any comments, questions, please raise your hand or shout it out. I know having grown up in a rural farm community, this reminds me so much of it. People never raised their hand, they just shouted stuff out. So.